Listen to the All in My Head podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Please, allow me to show you something.
Welcome back to the All in My Head podcast. I'm Jenny, and I am your host, and we are back for episode 8. Episode 8 of season 1 is here, and I'd just like to start by saying we'll probably have 3 more episodes until season 1 is done, and back at it again in January. And thank you all for tuning in and listening. I appreciate it. And I hope that you are having as much fun and learning as much and connecting as much as I am. I wanted to start by saying that this episode is a heavy one. And I wanted to kind of give you a visual of what my recording space looks like today, because it looks a little bit different. Although it's in a room that's very vibey and is surrounded by all my favorite things and where I do my yoga and meditate. Today I have my incense burning and I'm surrounded by my favorite crystals. And I have a cup of tea and a cup of water. And I'm kind of just surrounding myself with all the things that give me peace and comfort. Because like I said, this one's a little bit of a heavy subject. So I wanted to be surrounded by the things that bring me comfort and peace. And in saying that, I made myself a cup of tea, and I will probably pause here and there to take a sip of tea or a sip of water or just breathe. So know that I'm here. I'm just taking a moment. But when I was making my cup of tea this morning, yogi tea, I had my little message, and I keep my little messages and I put them in a jar. And when I need to kind of have a little inspiration or whatever the case may be, I pull from those. But this morning, the message said, every neighbor can be your teacher. And I thought that this is very apropos for today, because we will touch on some of the people who were teachers and neighbors to me. And also that, anyone's experience can be a teacher to you. And even if you don't know someone, they could be your neighbor. And I hope that this message and this topic that I'm going to talk about today reaches people who need it. So here we go. Episode 8 is called Reclaim Your Joy, Healing Trauma and Honoring Your Inner Child. And I've talked about that before. I've touched on trauma and that topic about healing my inner child a little bit, but I want to kind of jump right in and kind of dive into the deep end with it. And my hope is that this opens up a bigger discussion and helps anyone who has been in a similar situation. It helps them to feel seen and to feel heard, and know that it's okay to talk about things that have been traumatic in your life or caused pain. And it's also okay to take care of yourself in any and every way that you need to, so that you can heal, because that's what I've had to do. And trauma looks different for everyone. So this isn't a one-size-fits-all description or story. This is my experience with trauma growing up and my journey of coming to terms with it and healing, and my healing journey and growth. And this has been a process for me my entire life. So we're talking 45 years plus. I'm going to be 52. So this has been my whole life. This has been a journey of learning and growing. And, I knew very much at a very young age, I knew that some of what I was going through was not normal. And I say normal in air quotes. You can't see me, but I'm saying that. And I was well aware that the pain that I felt was very real, and that the feelings that I felt were deep and sad, and that were breaking me in a very legitimate way, even though I was constantly being told I was dramatic and that it wasn't real. And growing up in the 70s and 80s, I didn't really have any terms for those feelings or for what was being done to me. We would say now that it was a narcissistic relationship and that it was abusive and that I was probably a victim of gaslighting. But I also knew a couple of very close friends of mine in my teen years who were victims of severe physical and emotional, psychological torture by their parents. So I was kind of gauging my situation, what I was going through with that. And I would use that to make excuses to diminish my abuse and make it as less than. Because these other couple of friends that I had were really being hurt. They were going through it. And I diminished what I was going through because it wasn't as severe as what they were going through. And that was on my imaginary scale of, what abuse looked like or the levels of abuse and trauma. That was all in my mind. That was, again, all in my head, like this podcast is called. But it was also because those were the lines that I was being fed, right? That it was normal, that it was all in my head. And so I would rationalize it in that way. And so growing up, I talked about this early on in my first podcast, I kind of buried it. I used the tool of writing as my way of processing through. And I just kind of put my head down, tried to be good and not cause waves. And really, I was just drowning by the time I was 16, 17 years old. And I would journal and I would just try to get it out in any way I could. I joined the cheerleading team and the track team and any kind of club or team that I could be involved in that would kind of take me away and take me out of that. And, by the time I was 17, I had moved out and moved in with my boyfriend, who is now my husband and has been for 33 years. And I just proceeded to go about my life doing grown-up things. I got married, I had children, I worked, and I lived my life. But I wasn't really processing what I went through because I was still going through it. You don't just stop being a child and you don't just stop being someone's child. That is a lifelong journey. And since I was still going through it and that person was still ever present in my life and a very main character of the family, I just continued to try to diminish it and to call it by any other name than trauma or abuse. And, I was busy. I was raising my kids, and that helped me in a lot of ways because it just helped me to take the focus off of that situation and that relationship. But also, we were around this person daily. And as anyone knows who has been through similar situations, and when you're raising your own children, that stirs those feelings a lot more. But I made excuses, and my kids were very happy when they were growing up in and around this person. And that's all that mattered to me because they were treated well. And, we know that we as moms are, happy when our children are happy. So if they were happy, then that was enough for me. I said that was enough for me. But then your kids grow up and they start to see the way you're treated. And it's very conflicting for them because it's by someone they love too. And so I remember my oldest son saying to me, "Why does this person talk to you and treat you that way when all you do is give?" And that broke me. it was so conflicting for me as well, because I know that they loved this person and loved this person, but also I was showing them that it was okay in a way to be treated this way and to be spoken to this way. So again, it was very much a conflict of my life. And I would say it took me into my late 30s and 40s to even start the healing process. I didn't know what or how to begin. But again, as you're raising your children and you start to see that, that pain and that trauma is infiltrating your life on a daily, you know that you need to do something, right? And when you know better, you do better. And I love my 3 sons to a fault sometimes, but I knew that I wanted them to know, not just hear, how much they were loved. And loving them meant loving myself first. And so I needed to start that healing process by learning to love myself in a way that I was not loved, and to be able to give that to my kids in a more concrete way. But I would say that my healing process really ramped up in these past 6 years, and that I took it more seriously, and I put more intention behind it, and more so in my journaling, because I felt like writing things out and getting them out in a way that I love helped me process through. I used to say that I wrote better when I was in pain, or my writing was better when I was in pain. But I think that that's because that's kind of the only place I knew to write from. And it's not to say that those pieces aren't beautiful and aren't meaningful, but I think that I needed to learn how to write from different places. So I really needed to get that out and journal and start taking even courses and classes to support the healing and the inner child wounds and wound work that I needed. And that included therapy and everything and anything that I could do and use to support the process of healing through this childhood trauma. And I have to say that the brain is wild, because it really does have a way of protecting you. Because I buried so much of what I went through and kind of boxed it away in a part of my brain that I didn't access as often as I probably needed to. And again, the brain does what it needs to do to protect you so that you can live. I mean, that's really what it is. And I think that, like me moving out at 17 was a big breaking point for me, where I was on that fence of I either need to go or I guess, or is where I'm at. I didn't have any other options. But the brain is amazing in how it protects you. But it also, when it opens up and it unfolds, it's messy. And, I think that starting therapy was a big propeller into my, an even deeper dive into my healing. And healing, it's a lifelong process. We know this. We know that we're not healed, that we're always healing. And that's what I would say, that I'm healing. But I have come so far from that wounded person, that kind of half of a person that I was. And I'm in a much happier place than I think I've ever been in my life. And, in this process, I said I found a therapist, and we definitely bonded right away. We definitely had a connection right away. And I feel like finding a therapist who's a person of color was huge for me. We in the Latino community and in the Black community and people of color in any way, shape, or form. It's, therapy is, it is not what we're taught to do. And so I definitely know that we bonded right away, and we worked through a lot in a short period of time. And one of the biggest things that she helped me see was when I would say things like, my inner voice stops me from doing more writing, or taking my writing more seriously, or starting a podcast, or public speaking and talking about things that I know I have experience in and with, and saying things like, my inner voice tells me that I'm not good enough, and I'm not worthy enough, and I'm not talented enough, and I can't be loved, and I don't deserve love, and who do I think I am, wanting all these things or thinking that I can do any of these things. And that those voices, or that voice, would honestly halt me from moving forward in any and all ways, and any of these areas that I knew that I loved and wanted to be more actively engaged in. And even though I'm great at lifting other people up and empowering others and telling others to follow their dreams and, to give their all and to pursue what they love, I mean, I am the queen of those statements. I would tell my kids that all the time. I always said to them, do what you love and follow what you love. I always said have a backup plan. I mean, there's never a bad idea to have a backup plan, but I was very much the one who empowered others to say, do what you love and follow what you love. And if it speaks to your heart, then it's your purpose. And I would tell my kids that. And I certainly told my friends that all the time, and still do. And my students, as I was in a school setting working for 18, 19 years, I always told my students to do that. But I was terrible at taking my own advice. I always referred to that inner voice, and my therapist was the one who helped me realize that that voice was never mine. That voice that I would hear was not my voice. She said, I feel like I know you well. I know what your voice sounds like. And that's not your voice. It's not your voice. It's not that you don't have an inner voice, and that we all don't have an inner voice, but that is not your voice. That voice is the person's voice who spent your life diminishing you and telling you that you aren't worthy, that you're not good enough, that you're not talented, and the host of other things that you were told. And she kept saying, that is not your voice. So stop listening to it. And this was the sentence, or this was the statement that my therapist said that literally blew my mind, but also set me on a path of stopping, of breaking that thought pattern and listening to that inner voice. And what she said was, so if you have set a boundary to cut this person out of your life physically and emotionally, why are you letting them live rent-free in your mind? Because if you've set this boundary and you're not allowing this person in your life physically, emotionally, but you're letting them live rent-free in your mind, speaking your narrative, you're only allowing that abuse to continue. And it's just in your mind. And sometimes that's worse than them physically being a part of your life. And that blew my mind. That literally blew my mind, because I had been telling myself the narrative that, I cut this person out of my life and I'm healing from that and I'm fine and I'm moving on. And that has halted that trauma from continuing and that burdensome relationship to continue to kind of burr a hole in me. But it hadn't, because I was continuing to allow these narratives in my mind and in my daily self-talks, or in my daily, just in my daily mind. And I was so firm in my physical boundaries and not allowing them to be a part of my physical life, but I was still allowing that narcissistic narrative and the feelings of inferiority to infiltrate my mind, and it kept me frozen. It kept me frozen like that wounded child at 6, 8, 12, 15 years old. Stuck. I was just stuck in their words of contempt and judgment and criticism and rejection, and I literally couldn't move forward. I had all these plans of things that I wanted to do and things that I wanted to start and ways that I wanted to move forward in my life, in my pursuing my writing more intently and getting my voice out into the world. But I was letting and allowing this narrative to hold me hostage. And like I said, once I heard that and sat with it, it was like a literal light switch was flipped. And I could feel this physical weight lifting off of my body. And I felt that weight lifted when I initially made that boundary and drew that line in the sand with this person. And it was good for me. It was very good for me to do that. And I knew I needed to do that because I had tried every other way and every other thing I knew possible to do. So it was a weight that was lifted at that time. But that realization of me continuing to allow them in my mind and to control my thought patterns was an epiphany. It was the biggest epiphany that allowed me to feel freer than I ever had. And it made me feel free to pursue the things that I had put on hold, to not feel like I wasn't worthy of happiness, that I could do all these things that, to me, the universe, God, my ancestors had put on my heart as my purpose. I felt like it gave me the power to love myself more than I ever have. And it allowed me to say, it's my time and I'm good enough and I'm worthy. And again, I would tell people that all the time. I was, or am, probably still very much that cheerleader for everyone else. But that was the first time that and I'm going to get a little emotional here, that I said it to myself and I felt it. And I felt it in my soul that it was my time and that it was okay and that I am worthy and that I am loved and that I love myself enough to give myself a chance at the things that I love and want and that are written on my heart. So part of my healing process was healing those parts of my inner child that were still wounded. And in that healing process and through therapy and through groups that I belong to, I continued the hard work. I did shadow work classes and an ancestral poetics course. And that allowed me to write in the mind of that child that I had left behind. And it allowed me to conjure those dreams that inner child let die. And I took any and every writing course I could take. So that just unlocked my writer's soul a little bit more. It kind of allowed my writer's soul to feel free in the most beautiful way that I had never felt before. A lot of times when I would write in the past, I would write from this place of pain, and it could be crippling at times. I mean, it would certainly open up the wounds, and I would cry about it, and I would sit in those feelings and emotions, and it could take me to a dark place. And I think I needed that sometimes, but I was able to write about pain and trauma and healing in a raw way, but from a more healed place. And so I started to hear a different tone in my writing. I feel like it was definitely a less judgmental way and in more of a loving way. And even though it was raw and it could still have themes of darkness, I felt the light. And another big thing that I did, and this was through a job that I had, and I was blessed with meeting some amazing people. I took this and I moderated this grief program. And this grief program was with this amazing man named Reggie. And I hope, because he has agreed to be a guest on my podcast, I hope to be doing that program very soon with him and talking about his program and talking about grief. But he talked about grief in a very different way, through a very different lens. And that grief isn't just about physically losing someone to death. And we do grieve that. And that's very, very much what people conjure in their minds when we talk about grief. And I talked about how we lost my father-in-law, my husband's father, just 3 months ago. And we've been in that grief process for a while now in a very different way. But what Reggie talked about in his program was grieving a relationship, even if you were the one who set the boundaries, and that we can grieve someone that is still living, and that we can grieve a relationship even if we were the ones to set the boundary. Like I said, that's from a wonderful teacher and healer. But that was very eye-opening to me. I think that people want to believe that if you set this boundary, then that's on you. You don't get the choice or the opportunity to grieve that relationship or that person. And it allowed me to feel confident and sure in my boundary setting, but also grieve the relationship for what it was, for what it is, and also for what it could have been. And it also helped me to look at my relationship with my kids and what I want it to look like, and what it looked like in the past, and how it's grown over the years, and how it could still grow, because I'm the mother of grown children who have their own lives and their own children and families. And it helped me to look at that in a different scope, and not to measure my relationship or my boundary with how I want to proceed in my relationships in the future. And it also taught me that it's okay to set those boundaries, and that I am worthy of having healthier relationships in my life. And that allowed me to set boundaries in other relationships and to see other relationships for what they really were. You know, they say that relationships come for seasons and for reasons, and I'm a firm believer in that. And Reggie's grief program helped me to see that in a different way. And I really can't wait to have him on the podcast to talk more about that. And another big part of my healing and my healing process was naming and identifying my coping mechanisms. And I mean my coping mechanisms that I had as a child growing up, and also mental health issues that I probably very much suffered as a child, and I didn't have the vocabulary to know and to talk about that then. But I've, said this in previous episodes, that these were the things that we weren't allowed to talk about. And I would say that retrospectively, I suffered greatly with OCD as a child. I definitely had very obsessive and compulsive behaviors that back then I felt like if I didn't do them, something worse would happen. That someone could die because I didn't tap the light switch 12 times, or I didn't brush my teeth the same number of times on each side, or a host of other obsessive behaviors. But I also looked at OCD as something I could control. And it was my control in the chaos of my childhood. So it allowed me to feel this sense of consistency and control that made me feel safe. And I definitely had these behaviors as an adult, and I don't think it was super noticeable to anyone else, but I knew the things that I would do. But also, I noticed that it would increase or decrease depending on the stress in my life. And I saw a lot of these behaviors ramp up when my son was diagnosed with leukemia as a child. And again, that's a situation where you feel out of control, so you do things that make you feel in control. But I would say I still have OCD and ADD behaviors to this day. I definitely have always been a germaphobe. Not to the point that I live in a bubble, but my kids know, like, I started that hand sanitizer craze long before the pandemic came along, and I always had one hanging off my purse, to the point where I got my son's baseball player friends to want one on their baseball bags, even though they were playing in the dirt every day and getting filthy and touching the same ball that everybody else was touching, and gloves and bats and all the things. They wanted to be like Mrs. Sullivan. So I definitely know that I have OCD behaviors, but it was important for me through this healing process to name these mental health issues that I had and have. I definitely had some depressive moments in my life. I definitely look back at my first pregnancy and birth of my first child, my oldest son, and know that I suffered from postpartum depression. And I can name those things now, and I can feel confident and comfortable in saying that these were things I went through, that a lot of people go through. And again, like I said, I think growing up, my coping mechanism was to focus on my journal and to dump my thoughts and feelings into that, because it got it out of my head for the most part. And I also leaned into relationships that felt right and that felt good as a child. And I leaned into those relationships with people who I knew loved me. And I call those the people that loved me into being. And it was a survival tool for sure back then. It was something that I needed to do to survive. But I was also blessed and lucky to have those types of people in my life, because not everybody does. And not everyone has those people. And that's, retrospectively, I'm so grateful. And I think back on it a lot. And it's important for others who, may not have that unconditional love from the person who birthed you or the person who raised you, to find those earth angels and also those angels in heaven. I definitely knew as a child that I had angel guides, and I knew that they protected me from completely crumbling, from completely disintegrating, and from completely ceasing to exist in this world. And I know that one of my earth angels was my aunt, Titi Edis. And now she's one of my angel guides for sure. And I know that they also came in forms of family friends who just saw me, and who, although not vocally to stop what was happening or to even name it per se, but that in the middle of the crisis and chaos, that they were able to feed my soul. And they fed my soul with love and with positivity. And they were open and honest, and they were just good to me and good for me. And later on in life, it was in the form of friendships, good friendships in my teenage years, which I was super grateful and lucky for, because I was that awkward teen who didn't necessarily fit in, the Latina in a white Catholic school who kind of stood out like a sore thumb with her afro and her big hair and all the things. Life from teachers and professors that I had. And those are the people that saved me in a beautiful physical way. And I knew that once my mother's mother had passed, that she was a huge angel guide for me. And I've heard that in many readings that I've had with, Reiki masters or meditation or in some of these other psychic development classes and things like that. And other healing modalities. I've heard that my maternal abuela, Maria, was and is one of my biggest angel guides. And although we weren't super close, she lived in Puerto Rico and we lived in the United States and we didn't see her often. I don't know. I always felt this bond with her growing up. And when she passed, I just kind of knew that she was out there and up there in heaven watching over me. And that helped me. That helped my sanity. But I would say the biggest healing modality for me was taking back memories of my childhood. And I say taking back memories and making them things that I could now control and maybe change the narrative to a happier new memory. It's not the old memory anymore. It's the new memory. And for me, growing up, if I loved something or it was something that I was personal and close to me, if it was something that I felt like I needed or that I poured into, like my journals or a Purple Rain album that I had gotten for my birthday from one of my good friends in middle school, or a record player that I always wanted, or the book The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, or other records or journals. Things that brought me happiness were used as tools to be taken away, where you can cut deepest to kind of hurt the other person. They were used as tools to hurt me, so they would be thrown away. I mean, I don't have any of my journals from growing up. And, because it would hurt me emotionally, then it would be the tool that was used, against me. So when I say that I've moved forward and used this as one of my biggest healing modalities, is I wanted to change the narrative around these things. And now that I'm an adult and I can buy these things for myself, on my 50th birthday, we took a beautiful trip to Charleston with my husband, and I just went and got the things that I wanted for myself. He said, well, what do you want to do, or what do you want me to gift you? And I was like, I want you to gift me the day to do what I want to do and to reclaim some of these memories. So the first stop I made when we got to Charleston was to this record store. And I bought the Purple Rain album because that was something that was thrown away when I was a teenager. And I mean, I walked out of there feeling like I had purchased a mansion. It was just this feeling of a new memory, a new way to see this narrative that I'm controlling now. And then, I would continue to kind of purchase or get for myself the things that were taken away from me. I mean, I might have 1 million journals in this house. I don't even know. And in the garage, God only knows. But that's important to me. Writing is important to me. And I never want to not be able to put my words down. I want those to be things that my kids are able to look back at, and my grandkids. And taking that back for me and these things back for me were important. I loved rocks growing up, and I would always pick up beautiful rocks and save them. And I'm still that person. This room is filled with crystals and rocks and all the things, shells and everything. And I had a lot of these things growing up, and those things were thrown away. So I find myself filling those spaces with new, beautiful memories. And on that 50th birthday, we got home super late from Charleston, and my youngest son was like blowing up my phone. And he was like, hurry up, hurry up, get home. Your present was delivered and I want to make sure you got it and you love it. And I had told him about how I love to roller skate. And that's one of the big things that we used to do growing up and, with friends. But I would have to rent my skates because I didn't have a pair of skates. Only one person in our house had her skates. And I didn't have skates growing up, and I would rent them and, or beg that person to borrow their skates. And when I got home, I saw the box and I opened it up with him and his girlfriend, over video chat. And I sobbed like a baby because they were purple roller skates. Purple's my favorite color. Purple rain, all the things. And I sobbed like a baby because that was the first time that I had roller skates for myself. Like, these were my skates and nobody else could have them. And they were purple and the wheels lit up. And I probably roller skated up and down the hallway in our house for days. And it just brought the biggest smile to my face and the biggest joy to my heart. And this past Christmas, he got me the book, The Bluest Eye, which was also something that was thrown away because it was going to feed me with crazy ideas, I guess, growing up. But it was another gift that made me cry. And my kids do that all the time. Like, they find something that speaks to my heart, whether it's an album, which my oldest son got me, the Aretha album, because that was another one that was lost or thrown out growing up. And they just find these beautiful little ways of giving me a nod and saying, I see you and I'm here for you and I want to help you heal that broken piece. And that's probably been one of my biggest healing modalities or healing tools that I've been using lately. But also I feel like in healing these broken pieces, I don't want to cover them completely. I don't want it to be like they'd never existed. And so I kind of compare my healing to the Japanese art kintsugi, where, broken pieces of pottery are repaired with glue, but the broken pieces are lined with gold so that they're visible, so that you can still see them. Because it's in seeing the broken pieces that you really see the beauty. That the broken pieces are even more beautiful than the break. And seeing the broken pieces of yourself in that way is beautiful. It's amazing, really. I don't need to wish away the trauma or to clean it all up, to make it neat and tidy, or like it never existed. Because healing is messy and it's uncomfortable. And I think I now know that I, like anyone who has been through trauma, whether it's childhood trauma or trauma growing up or trauma as an adult or trauma in any aspect of your life or any time in your life, I know that I'm beautiful and that my wounds are beautiful and that they all made me who I am today. That the cracks are not a flaw, that they're symbols of my survival, that I'm perfectly imperfect, and that I can now show myself and feel gratitude for both the good and the bad of my life. That it helped me rewire my thinking to see the positive in the negative, and that I can now recall good memories from my childhood. And I do that often, especially in foods and recipes. I've found so much healing in the Spanish foods that I grew up with and making them and going back and making things that maybe I thought I didn't like at the time and trying it again, or maybe trying recipes that I thought I loved because they were made for me when someone wanted something from me and seeing that I really don't love that recipe anymore because I know the connotation that was behind it. But also loving sitting in these foods and making these memories and continuing some of these beautiful traditions with my kids and my grandkids and the people that I love. And just knowing that everything in life happens for a reason. And I just honor my inner child now with whatever it needs. Whatever it needs. And if that's rest, then I do it. If it's specific foods or snacks that my inner child wants, then I get it and I have it and I relish in that moment. And like I said, I make these recipes that I know that this inner child might be craving, or take the trip that I want to take. And sometimes just act like a 5-year-old and dance without abandon, or sing at the top of my lungs like nobody is listening. And we should all do that. We should all honor that inner child in whatever way it needs to heal and to be seen and to be heard. You know, sing that song even if you don't know the words. Color outside the lines. Create something beautiful. Create art. Talk to that inner child. Comfort her. Pause and honor her in sacred rest. And I say sacred rest because we as a society do not believe that rest is beneficial. We are the go, go, go society, and rest and pausing is sacred. And just take joy in simple pleasures. Play outside. Soak up the sunshine. Discover connections with Earth, with our Earth Mother, with creatures and nature's little gifts and beauty, shells and rocks and leaves in the shape of hearts and all the beautiful creatures that are out there that we don't stop and look at like we used to when we were kids. And just stop and smell the roses. Just take that moment to stop and listen and look and belly laugh, that deep, unobstructed, genuine belly laugh that little kids and babies do. I hear it in my grandson all the time now. And it's beautiful and I love it. And that's really helping me, watching my grandkids, to connect with that child that's inside of me. And cry. It's okay to cry. I said before, I'm a crybaby. I am very in tune with my emotions. I am very empathetic. So I cry at all the things. But cry. Cry deeply. And you can mourn and from the deepest depths of your soul. Release. Crying is a release. It releases chemicals. It releases oxytocin and endorphins, and it's natural and it's healthy and it's cleansing. So cry. That's okay too. And like I said, this podcast has been huge and healing for me. This has been a place where I can talk about all these things that have lived rent-free in my mind and to get them out. And again, I say I'm healing because I'm not healed. Healing is not linear. It's a process. And although I'm far from the child that I used to be before, that wounded child and adolescent and young adult who was always searching for answers and questioning her worth and her worthiness, and if she was worthy of love. Love is not based on your level of healing. We are all worthy of love. Wherever we are in our journey, we all deserve everything joyful, happy, abundant, healthy in our lives. We all deserve that. So I feel like we all just need to get back to that feeling like a child again. Like, just feel and live in that childlike state of wonder once in a while. I know that has helped me. I know that has helped me to heal in a beautiful way. And I want to be the healthiest and best version of myself for me first and foremost, but also for my kids and for my grandkids and in my friendships and in my marriage. And someone once told me in a session that I was the one sent by my ancestors to break the generational curses, and to heal my lineage. And I was like, whoa, that is heavy and that is daunting. That's really what I thought in the beginning. I mean, I cried like I probably haven't cried before. But I thought, wow, that's heavy and that's daunting in the moment. And then I sat with it and I journaled about it, and I've recalled it in other courses and in other moments of connection. And I thought, wow, that's beautiful. Isn't that beautiful that my ancestors believed in me enough to say, you're the one. You're the one who's going to start that healing process. You're the one that's going to break that curse, that generational curse. You're the one who's going to heal or to start healing the lineage. And I think it's true. I think by me healing, my children will heal a little more, and their children will heal more, and their children to come will heal more, and that they will all know how much they were loved and wanted and seen and heard, and that they will step into their purpose sooner and greater and in the most profound way. And that generations to come will look back and say, wow, we did that. We really did that. I want to thank you all for listening. This one was long. I said it was going to be heavy. And I hope that if this is reaching you, that you feel seen, that you feel heard, that you feel loved, and that you find peace, and that you start healing and keep healing and love yourself a little bit more every day. Thank you so much for listening to the All in My Head podcast. If you have any questions or comments, the fan mail is open, and I would love to hear from you. And I look forward to talking with you very soon.